Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And in this video, we're going to take a look at an article by Den of Geek in which they compare anyone who has any criticism whatsoever with the Rings of Power, the spin off of Lord of the Rings, as being racists and likened to people who do incredibly bad things. I'm neither, but I do have genuine criticism. You can criticise a thing without becoming something else. But we'll take a look at the article. We'll go through it, and you can make your own minds up as to whether it's fair or not. I suspect not, but it's your opinion. I don't look to control people. I merely present my opinion. You're free to present yours. But anyway, here we go. I'll put myself down in the corner as usual, and we'll take a look at the article. Here we go. Okay, so here it is. As you see, it's Den of Geek, and the title says it all, really. Lord of the Rings of Power. Why fandom has to embrace change. Don't see why it has to embrace change, but we'll do. Intransigent and reactionary fandom is nothing new, but some responses to the Lord of the Rings of Power trailer show how damaged the culture has become. And it goes on. In response to the trailer for Amazon's new Lord of the Rings series, there has been a negative reaction based on the fact that not everyone in the series is a white man. That's a lie. That is them setting an agenda at the beginning of this part, this piece by them, this piece of filth, really. They're saying that this is the only reason that there's criticism. No, that may be some criticism, but it's not all the criticism. And so they're having to get in straight away. Their very first sentence: well, this is the agenda we're going after. This is what we're saying, and therefore we're going to tar everyone who has any criticism with this criticism. And it's sublimating the problem that they have many problems, but they're taking this one item and they're making this the problem. And this is not the problem. The problem is that they don't respect the law. But we'll go on. Sure, there have been other negative reactions too. Oh, I see. So every other reaction, we'll just sideline that. We'll mention it tiny, boom, because this is the one we want to concentrate on. But they've been trampled by review bombing rage. No, if it's receiving a lot of review bombing, or as we like to call it, reviews, maybe it's because it's no good. It's not that it's racist. It's not that the people are... Not everyone who's putting a downvote is a racist. It's got millions of downvotes. It's not racism, it's because it's rubbish. In particular, a lot of people have been posting a quote attributed to Tolkien to highlight their disgust. Evil is not able to create anything new, it can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good. And this is true. And that is why the Lord of the Rings of Power, isn't new, it isn't good, it is the destruction of something that existed already. Now he's saying, which is frankly colossally lacking in self-awareness. I think he is lacking in self-awareness at the irony of this. People are aware. They posted it because they're aware. The Rings of Power is an adaptation of the written word into visual medium made in the third decade of the 21st century. It is not going to match the books written in the middle of the 20th century in the same way as Peter Jackson's films do not match the books. Actually, Peter Jackson's films match the books very, very well. There are a couple of changes. They moved the big spider scene across Shelob from the second to the third, but that was for pacing. And Arwen was made slightly more important in the films. But generally speaking, the films are very, very faithful to the book in a lot of ways. Anyway, adaptations are affected by the change in medium and the context creative decisions are made in. They do not alter the original text and often increase its availability. Maybe, but they do alter the original text because there is so little text in this book. In this film, this series, should I say, they're taking the 150 pages, that much, of footnotes and appendices at the back of The Return of the King, and they're creating a story around it. There is no story there. There's just a list of things that happened, whom they happened to, and when they happened, with footnotes as to what effects they may or may not have had on other events and characters. It isn't a full story in its own way. So they can. This argument that they do not alter the original text is wrong, because they are altering the original text. Because A, there is no story to write, so they're having to create it. But also, with the time frames they're using, it's massively changed. The time frame was thousands of years, and they're cramming it into a very short single snap in time. A few years in time, rather than thousands of years. So that is quite clearly wrong before we start. 20 years ago, there was a similar backlash, including from a teenage me, when Jackson's films made Arwen a more prominent character than in the books. And looking back, I realised my objections were based on ignorance, and still are, of Tolkien's appendices and the adaptation process in general. Unexamined sexism and entitlement. No. There were the criticisms at the time were still based on the lore, and that it had changed the original story. No one had any problem with Arwen herself. So you're putting in sexism where there was none. Fan reactions have undoubtedly become more extreme since Jackson's Lord of the Rings film trilogy was released, and they started off aggressive. Actually, no, they didn't start off aggressive. Amazon started off aggressive because they released the trailer, and before they released the trailer, they were saying some people are going to really find this divisive and hate-filled because... So they knew in advance that what they were doing was going to be splitting the community, splitting the fandom. And they've split it along the lines of real fans, modern faux fans. Because real fans go, this isn't the book, this is rubbish, this is not Tolkien. New fans are going, oh, isn't it marvellous what they've done with this? No, it's really not. So, the positives that can come with fandom don't counteract its negative sides. And ignoring the increasingly destructive elements with a kind of toxic positivity amounts to a suspension of critical engagement and an unwillingness to process difficult truths. Yeah, let's talk about processing difficult truths. It is difficult for the writer of this piece to process the fact that there are so many mistakes and errors in The Rings of Power that he doesn't want to see them. The bearded lady, oh wait, there isn't one, and yet Tolkien explicitly states that dwarves have beards. Also, dwarves have many, many generations living underground. There would be no melanin, so there would be no black dwarves. Any creature that lives in caves or underground, and that they're not noted for being dark-skinned. You have the time frames that we've mentioned. They've all been crushed down. So the difficult truths for him are the fact that reality is subjugating itself upon his opinions, and he doesn't like that. There's a sense of a fan's identity being tied up in something make-believe, making a criticism of their favourite stories a criticism of them as people. That's exactly what he's doing. He's criticising us for saying that we're criticising people because we're criticising their story, and that means we're criticising their very being because we're disagreeing with this production. And he's complaining to us about that. And then doing the same thing. He's criticising us because we're criticising them. So he's saying we're terrible people because we dare to criticise his show. So, I mean, seriously, he's doing the one thing he says real fans are doing. That makes him... well, it makes him a bit of an arse, really, doesn't it? For example, despite Tolkien's vehement anti-racism, there are issues with his mythology. His equating the dwarves with Jews, including linguistically, was intended positively as a representation of dispossessed people, but he also described their tremendous love of the artefact in a 1965 BBC interview, which is a common anti-Semitic trope. Let's just stop here. He never once described the dwarves as Jewish. Never. He never said that. And anyone who looks at the dwarves in Lord of the Rings and says, oh, they are obviously Jewish, is guilty of racism. He never said they were Jewish. If you think they're Jewish, That's your racism, not Tolkien's. So I'm afraid that the writer of this article seems to be a bit anti-Semitic. Some people regard pointing this out as a personal attack, an attempt to stop them from enjoying something they love. Why? Because it's obviously false. Right. Lord of the Rings has already been co-opted by the far right. Has it? Really? Citation, please. Despite Tolkien being on record as hating apartheid and hating British and American imperialism in the Far East, raging against Nazis, that their interpretation of his work as an Aryan allegory, he was asked by German publishers in 1938 if they could translate The Hobbit, but Tolkien was told that this was conditional on his proving he had Aryan blood and no Jewish ancestry. Yes, but that is the Nazis. So he declined. Thank you very much. So there's a bit of anti-Semitism for you, isn't there? Him declining the Nazis, him actually fighting the Nazis. So, you know. And this has continued to be the case. In 1970s Italy, there were Hobbit summer camps run by a burgeoning right-wing movement. Yeah, the movement might have been right-wing. The Hobbit isn't right-wing. Tolkien isn't right-wing. Just because Hitler was totally averse to smoking. It was a complete non-smoker. So are you comparing all non-smokers with Hitler? Well, Hitler was a non-smoker, you non-smoking Hitler-like person. No, don't be stupid. Just because somebody likes something doesn't make the thing they like wrong. Fans of Tolkien include Gianluca Casseri and Anders Breivik. Now, both of these are racially motivated mass murderers. And Varg Vikernes, a black metal musician, murderer, anti-Semite, and a scientific racist, i.e. someone who misapplies science to support their racism. Again, the fact that they like something doesn't mean the thing they like is wrong. I like burgers. Been on a diet recently, haven't had too many burgers. But if I was to go and do something terrible, and the fact that I like burgers, does that mean that everyone who likes a burger is a terrible person? It's a fallacy. It's an empty argument. It's a straw man argument. But yes, given its previous connections with fascism and the response, there is no connections with fascism. You're making the connections with fascism because you're saying some fascists read the book. Doesn't mean the book is fascist. It's sadly not surprising to see the Lord of the Rings fandom engaging in culture war campaigns. They're not engaging in culture war campaigns. They're engaging in a campaign against the destruction of the lore of the Lord of the Rings. It goes on, and we're not going to go on with it because it's just gone about everyone moaned about Ghostbusters, everyone moaned about Total Recall, RoboCop, and all that. Yeah, because they did the same thing. They took beloved franchises and distorted them and corrupted them. But we'll come up and round off this video. So there it is. The argument he's making is that because someone who was bad likes something, then the very thing that they like is bad. And that's not the case. I mean, as I've shown. But he's also saying that because you criticise one thing, you must yourself be something else. And this is not the case, as I've shown. He, I think, is racist because his argument that, the Jews were allegorized in the dwarves. No, they weren't. The fact that he's seeing that is he's overlaying his subconscious bias. So he's obviously an anti-Semitic individual who looks at dwarf and all his mind is showing him is Jewish. I don't see that, but he does. So he's a horrible person, I suspect. But what can you can't deal with these people. You can't talk to them because they won't listen. They won't listen to anything. You can't give them evidence because they'll disbelieve the evidence or say the evidence is fake or that the evidence can't be right because it goes against what he feels to be the truth. And that's the trouble. But of course he's free to write his little pieces, but it's a shame that he brings everything down around him. Some of the criticisms of this show are so genuine and so appalling. Because you let the time frame, the argument I will give with the time frame is that Sauron took 400 years to teach the elves to make rings. He then spent 1800 years fighting the elves with the Númenóreans. That's getting on for 2,500 years. I mean, they're going to have to cover that in a few years in this series. You can't do it. Now, of course, you can argue that the time frame was somewhat shortened in The Lord of the Rings. And that's for narrative. You're not going to sit there and show Frodo's party and then go 17 years later, because the ring is powerful, the ring is bad, you have to have that sense of urgency. And so they didn't show the 17 years gap. They went almost straight away. And that's fine. But you're only talking a 17-year gap here. You're not talking 2,500 years. So there are many genuine criticisms of the show. But of course he just picks up on the one criticism, which is, oh, you don't like the Black Dwarf then? But we've already addressed that. There would be no Black Dwarves. We haven't even addressed the fact that it would be set in Britain 4,000 years ago. Well, the truth hurts some people, doesn't it? Anyway, I shall round this off now. If you like what you see and hear on this channel, please hit the subscribe button below, ring the bell for notifications on new content, leave a like, and definitely leave a comment. We enjoy reading them. And until next time, stay safe, stay well. Goodbye.